the resemblance to the face. We have a lot of experiments, such as the Archibald's ones, in contemporary photography and in the field of the so-called food porn word. So here you can see a few pictures, but I'm pretty sure you have seen a lot, on social networks. Then, in the religious sphere, I mean, this is the logo of Chiesa Pastafariana Italiana, and this is a reinterpretation of a very famous word art. So where the Pastafarian fine spaghetti monster is represented, and again we have a face there. We find faces made of foods in object design. So food design, but food object design. These, for instance, are plates used to encourage children to eat by playing with food, by composing faces, or make them discover food by composing faces with food. We also have cooking tools, allowing us to create faces using food. So, for instance, I mean, you can decide that for breakfast it's better to have a noli sandwich, a popular one, or also so Narcissus actually moved to the kitchen too, so you can choose to have your own selfie on the sandwich sheet every morning. So I see that Professor Leone is particularly interested in the last one. And there are also a lot of festive rites, containing practices of construction, making a face by means of food. Here you have my first attempt at pumpkin carving as I was living in the US last Halloween. And I'm pretty proud of that, especially because my daughter immediately realized that that was a face. So I made it. And but we have a lot of practices where actually food is used to represent a face. Now, even more interestingly, food has been the object of several acts of face pareidolia, that is, the phenomenon consisting in seeing faces in confused visual environments, such as inanimate objects or abstract works. From the intentional representation of faces by means of food, then, we move toward the unintended emergence of the face in visual food patterns. And this is precisely the phenomenon that I'd like to explore today in response to Massimo's kind invitation to join this event. So, basically, my presentation will explore some crucial issues related to the processes of meaning-making underlying non-man-made facial images. So I will try to answer these questions. Who or what is their author? Do they suppose any form of intentionality? What can be said about the model reader they establish? And what are the effects of meaning deriving from them? So by answering this question, we will also think over the type of sign we are facing. Before doing that, however, it must be said that face pareidolia is pretty common in the food sphere. We have a lot of examples in mass and new media messages, as well in scientific literature proving this. So here, for instance, we have a short extract from The Late Show with David Letterman, dated 1997.
Okay, here we go. These are pastries that look like celebrities. Take a look at that. See that one right there? Vice President Al Gore.
It's better to get out of the presentation.
Yeah. See?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for saying.
This is some kind of sticky honey bun. Former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Here's a cherry Danish.
May I have just a second?
TV's Walker Texas Ranger Chuck Norris. Haven't made it through the window once.
No. May I say something?
Look at this.
May I say something?
Okay.
David, excuse me.
TV's Regis Philbin.
you know, and you said the other thing was generic, and maybe it was. I kind of put together a little something. Maybe you might find a little more. Sure, like, can you give me another chance?
I'm touched that you would consider.
I wrote up a little thing.
So brand new piece of music?
Yeah, new piece of music.
Okay,
An introduction to pastries.
All right, let's start all over. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for a little something we call pastries that look like celebrities.
Just a minute more.
Now, if you ask me what America means to me, this land of freedom and opportunity, I could talk about Mom, the flag, and apple pie, but that pie means the most, and I'll tell you why. Just celebrities, faces, the people who name this, all kinds of places, and in this country you can do whatever you want. You can see a movie star and a mother croissant. You can do anything, you can go anywhere. See someone you know in a chocolate eclair. The skies are limit when it comes to what you bring. Find a famous person and a piece of coffee cake. So when you ask me what makes America great, I'll tell you that just maybe it was something you ate. Yeah, a pastry that looks like a celebrity. Looks oh so good. Really, really, really good. Looks really damn good to me. How's America, everybody? Oh no, I'm just experiencing stuff.
No, again.
No.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, here we are again. So here, as we have seen, Letterman and Schaffer sarcastically talk and sing about pastries that look like celebrities, making fun of face pareidolia by suggesting that basically one could spot any face in any pastry and depicting it as a sort of American mania or attitude. In the past, in fact, pareidolia used to be considered a sort of obsession, a pathological sign, and more specifically, a symptom of psychosis. However, research has shown that it is not only a normal, but also a very common human phenomenon, which is probably linked to adaptive reasons. According to Liu et al., our visual system is highly tuned to perceive faces, likely due to the social importance of faces and our exquisite ability to process them. This tendency to detect faces in ambiguous visual information is perhaps highly adaptive, given the supreme importance of faces in our social life and the high cost resulting from failure to detect a true face. The face, in fact, we have already told it, is fundamental to interpersonal interaction, as it allows us to recognize other people, so their feelings, their emotions, their state of health, maybe some threat deriving from them, and so on and so forth, as well as ourselves. Even at a more general level, then, the brain has a bias favoring seeing something rather than nothing, so that it tends to jump to a pattern that makes sense of a situation. This should not make us think that face pareidolia is purely imaginary. Rather, it is based in physical reality and relies on the activation of a specific brain region called the right fusiform face area, which is the same that plays a crucial role in processing real faces. Therefore, a number of scientific studies have investigated the neurophysiological processes involved in face pareidolia with respect to various aspects, from differences among adults and infants, men and women, human beings and primates, and so on and so forth. However, it is essential to remember that, as Liu et al. Point out, because the images do not actually contain faces, face pareidolia clearly requires substantial involvement of the brain's the brain's interpretive power to detect and bind the faint-like faces futures to create a match with an internal face representation. So, despite being a congenital human faculty, in other words, pareidolia also depends on interpretative processes that cannot be neglected, even though most studies tend to do so, So if you look for studies on pareidolia, except for some papers by Professor Leone, you basically find studies by neurophysiologists focusing on biological and physiological aspects. So let's focus on the case of food, and specifically food-phase pareidolia, and see what it tells about such dynamics. So, when examining the cases I considered to prepare this paper, the first distinction clearly imposed itself, the one between general and specific pareidolic phases. The first category includes the majority of images that you can find on social media, so which are generally associated with hashtags such as I see faces, food pareidolia, etc. Here, the eidetic, topological, and chromatic configuration generally allows perceiving a sort of 0 degree of the face with no further specification in terms of gender, age, or personal identity. So we generally have only a few elements, such as 2 lines or rounded elements, often of the same color, which we recognize as the eyes, placed in the upper part of a bigger rounded form, the contour of the face, in a specular position, just above a central smaller element, recalling the nose, and below a line or a variously shaped form, recalling the mouth. The eidetic level is then essential in suggesting the emotive characterization of such pareidolic faces, which is in fact the element making them differ from each other. So, for instance, we can spot smiling beverages, pastries, sticks, peppers, or eggs, as in these examples, surprised zucchini and muffins, horrified peppers and tortillas, angry tarts, winking pizzas, and so on and so forth. So this has interesting effects on meaning. Food ceases here to be an inert material, a simple object subordinate to the eater's or cook's intentionality, to become itself provided with agency, since it allows the constitution of the observers as a patemic subject and is the passage to the phase of disposition and the deployment of the canonical passional program as illustrated by Grimas and Fontanilli. Or at least it is endowed with the capacity to express its own feelings, a form of subjectivity, we might say. In any case, the result seems to affect, although partially and generally only temporarily, the narrative program of the eater-cook. As Leone interestingly argues in On the Face of Food, in fact, a face can hardly become food, and we also touched this topic before. Most cultures and their respective languages do not conceive of edible vegetables and non-human animals as being endowed with a face. That's why, for instance, most of the messages condemning the consumption of meat, or rather generally animal-based foods, resorts precisely to the face to highlight the ethical implication associated with eating, as in these examples, which are in fact pretty common, and where the presence of the face is also generally strengthened by a visual and sometimes also verbal enunciative embrayage. Or also in the hyperbolic tones of the movie Sausage Party, where the association between veggies and children, and so the impossibility to eat them, figuratively finds expression in providing them with a face, even if they don't have one in nature. But, well, moving back from representation to unintended emergence, such an effect is evidently weaker. We can easily imagine that the foods in these pictures have been eaten after taking the pictures, also because it is generally the case of foods that didn't have a face before becoming food. Nonetheless, an alteration of the narrative program of those entering in contact with such faced foods can still be detected. The cook or eater stops cooking or eating to take a picture, and so becomes first of all an observer, favoring the logic of the so-called food porn over that of the stomach. What is more, as we have seen, this generally activates a passional program that was not expected to take place. So such dynamics draw the attention to another crucial issue. How do such faces emerge? What or who marks the passage from simple food materials to faces? It's pretty clear that they do not properly result from human intentionality, which, if anything, is reduced to an accidental discovery, a response to something similar to the punctum that Roland Barthes described in relation to photographs, which, it's worth reminding it, is a characteristic inherent to texts themselves, not a result of the observer's will or action. By contrast, these species can be seen either as a product of chance, such as when a foot is cut in a way that reveals a face in its interior, and sure, the cut is performed by the cook or eater, but pareidolia occurs in a regime of accident, not of manipulation, as Landowski would say, or at the most, as a creation of nature itself, whose creative capacity results in the alteration of the usual visual configuration of food, giving origin to the pareidolic effect, even prior to any intervention by a human agent. Actually, when more or less explicit visual alteration by human agents occur, such as in these cases, the resulting effect is quite different, with a shift from unintended emergence back to intentional representation. But well, let's keep with this for a moment and see what happens to such dynamics when we deal with the other category mentioned in the beginning, specific pareidolic physis, that is to say, food visual patterns resembling the face of a specific person, generally a celebrity or a deity. Here, for instance, you can see the famous naan bun, a cinnamon roll baked at the Bonga Java coffee shop in Nashville, which in 1996 became famous worldwide for its resemblance to Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Here we have Diana Deiser's 10-year-old grilled cheese sandwich bearing the likeness of the Virgin Mary. In 2004, it was bought on eBay by the Golden Palace Casino for $28,000. Here another interesting case. When in 2011 Kate Middleton was about to get married to Prince William, a 25-year-old British man and his girlfriend found their portrait on a jelly bean, which was later sold at an auction with an opening bid of £5,000. Well, of course, this is just Kate Middleton, not the Virgin Mary. So. And several other examples could be added to this list, so you have a few, some more here. Now, here, inedibility reaches its peak, not so much by virtue of a passional process involving the observer, as we described for the previous cases, but rather because of the different creative intentionality behind such pareidolic phases, which rather than chance or nature, seems now to be a transcendent agent, with celebrities, politicians, and royal members equated to deities. Food does become, we can say, an index of such transcendence, a surface on and through which it manifests itself in and to the immanent world. As such, it becomes an untouchable object of cult, which therefore has to be protected in plastic boxes or by means of other materials, not so much to prevent it from decay. In fact, pareidolia seems to make it enter the regime of an unnatural durativity, with sandwiches, such as the one I showed you before, inexplicably never going bad nor sprouting a spore mouth, but rather to stress the need for a different interpretation of such a text. It is not a food, but a prodigious effigy, a simulacrum of celestial or worldly god. It is not to be consumed, but rather preserved, contemplated, and venerated. And for this reason, it is generally considered worth great amounts of money. What is more, it generally becomes a divination omen and the way to miracles. So, for instance, the Bongo Java still claims that the naan bun I'm quoting wasn't, but very well could have been used to prove Mother Teresa was a saint. While, according to Diana Deiser, her holy sandwich brought her blessings, including a 70,000 won in a nearby casino. Actually, when she sold the sandwich, it was because, in her words, she wanted to share that kind of fortune with other people. So, as in other forms of pareidolia, however, iconism evidently prevails over indexicality. So we are back to the problem Professor Leone mentioned in his introduction this morning. It is not just any food, but food that looks like deities or celebrities, and in our specific case, like their feces. This raises a very important question, which mainly remained implicit in the case of general pareidolic feces, and unfortunately still tends to be neglected in many studies on pareidolia, but is fundamental, the so-called problem of iconism. A problem term that, as we all know, is crucial in semiotics and was at the heart of Eco's reflection. So reproaching the so-called weak iconism of those who understood the iconic sign as, I'm translating from Eco's essay Il segno iconico, the iconic sign, something similar to objects, something spontaneous based on analogical relationships. Already in 1970, the Italian semiotician suggested that it should be rather conceived as a social product, that is, an object of convention, bearer of history and ideologies. So, if on the one hand, there are certainly particular eidetic, topological, and chromatic configurations that underlie face perception as a result of the activity of a specific area of our brain, on the other hand, so we can reasonably expect general pareidolic faces to be easily identified by everyone. On the other hand, specific pareidolic faces, such as the one I showed you, relying on codes that are not equally universally shared, remind us that similarity always results from conventionality. So, for instance, a music lover with no particular interest in religion would probably spot a resemblance to Francesco Guccini rather than to Jesus on this pancake, or to a less celestial Madonna rather than to the Virgin Mary on the Iser sandwich, while a person in movies would more probably see here Marlene Dietrich. And a young child who is in love with cartoons but has no knowledge of adult movies would possibly see Mad Madam Mim or Mr. Magoo in the Namban, or a Ninja Turtle rather than Whoopi Goldberg on this onion. Actually, I think it resembles more the Ninja Turtle than Whoopi Goldberg, and so on and so forth. So that's why, in spite of what happens with general pareidolic faces, paratexts are frequent in such cases. Actually, all the images I showed you, so Whoopi Goldberg, the Virgin Mary, and yeah, they were just opposed to the food images. So they are always showed together in order to show us the codes that the recognition codes that isolate the pertinent characteristics on which the identified similarity is based. It is in this sense that pareidolia requires us to reconsider a long-standing yet still open issue in semiotics and more generally in philosophy, to which Peirce himself paid attention by introducing the concept of hypo-icon, the need to move away from the naive theory of an objective similarity, a naive theory that nonetheless has imposed itself in different fields, as Eco already complained 4 decades ago, and which risk underlying any purely physiological interest in phenomena of this type. Although being a congenital faculty man, pareidolia very much depends on the observer's past experiences and visual culture, what we generally refer to by means of the concept of encyclopedia. That means on the specific visual ideologies that in each culture shape our instinct of recognition of the visual forms and the subsequent attribution of agentivity on them. This conventional, symbolic nature, after all, emerges very clearly if we consider cases of pareidolia, sacred pareidolia, that's the way it is sometimes referred to, in cultures where the face of God cannot be represented. Here, similarity cannot but pass through the verbal language, with faces replaced by names. Yet, these foods are perceived, and sometimes banned, as you can see on the right, as similar or looking like Allah, and the effects of meaning resulting from them are not that far from the previously described ones. So, if we go back to David Letterman and Paul Schaffer's show, we can now see that, although certainly sarcastic and extremely emphasized, their message was not completely unfounded. In a certain sense, in fact, it is true that pareidolia reflects a specific culture's attitude, at least in the sense that it cannot be fully understood without taking into consideration those cultural grids that shape similarity and hence iconism, thus making certain resemblances emerge more easily in some semiospheres, such as the ironically depicted American one, than in others. Conventionality, in other words, does not merely concern the intentional representation of faces aimed at emphasizing the ludic and aesthetic dimension of food, or rather denouncing its ethical implications. but it also shapes and guides the unintentional emergence of the face in food visual patterns. The pareidolic sign is a complex one, which requires to be interpreted exactly as other signs. Although hardly perceptible in the generally pretty simple images used in neurophysiological experiments, I mean, they generally use very simple images resembling what I call the general pareidolic faces, so maybe that's why we have this problem with neurophysiological experiments. This fact is fundamental, and with this I conclude, clearly points out the need to complement those analyses with a semiotic approach to this kind of phenomenon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.